Would you like to know the main elements of a comprehensive enterprise-wide security architecture? If so, this video is for you. In this video, we are going to discuss the main components of a security architecture, and then we'll talk a little bit about each of those elements or components of a security architecture. So by the end of this video, you will understand what goes into a security architecture for an enterprise or any other organization for that matter. So let's begin with the main components, and then I'll dive deeper on all the other components of an enterprise-wide security architecture. So to look at a high level, architecture for security involves a lot of different things. It's not just stick a firewall somewhere. It's not just IAM. It's a combination of many things. So what's going to go into what we do as security architects and what will go into our security architecture will be elements of risk management, elements of identity and access management, a significant amount of network security, and obviously we'll talk about what goes into this, a lot of data security and data privacy, making sure that the applications are secure and developed secure from the beginning throughout the enterprise, making sure that we use encryption everywhere with large cryptography demands, making sure that we architect the systems in a way that someone can actually manage these systems and see what's going on into these systems, as well as some governance, risk management, and some compliance and physical security. So I hope you're seeing here that the elements here are some significant elements of security. It's not just one domain, it's holistic in nature and a comprehensive posture. So let's talk about the first element that's going to go into security, which is risk management. And when we're talking risk management, we're talking about determining what the risks are for that organization and developing a risk management plan for that organization to help them reduce their risk. So the first thing we typically need to do as security architects is determine what is the organization's assets. Because we have to determine what level of protection we need, and we can only do that when we know the organization's assets that we're trying to protect. So typically speaking, the first thing is to identify the assets that the organization has, classify those assets, high value, top secret, those kinds of things, as well as the value of the assets to the business, and then assess the risk to those assets. What is the risk that those assets are compromised this year? What is the cost of that risk? So by doing so, after we understand the risks and we calculate the cost of the risks, we now know what our risk exposure is. And at that point, we also know which risks are the greatest risks. So we can now prioritize managing the highest risks to our business. So we're going to ultimately have to prioritize risks because in no environment can we ever make it completely safe. So we're going to have to determine which are the biggest risks and prioritize them and triage them the same way a physician would do. We will also, in the risk management phase, develop incident response plans, other procedures, that kind of thing. And typically speaking, we'll create what's called a risk register, and we'll keep knowledge of the risks that we actually have. So that's going to be the risk management element of our, enterprise-wide security architecture. So after we get past risk management, now we start talking about how do we secure the systems to protect against those risks. So a lot of what we're going to be doing today is related to identity and access management from a security architecture perspective, especially as we migrate towards zero trust. Boundaries are softer than they used to be. People are now in 3 cloud, 2 SaaS providers, and how do you mitigate those risks? It's a lot harder than the traditional data center. So that means with identity is going to become so critical for us. Identity is the new parameter. So as architects, we'll be involved in federated identity systems from various cloud providers to potentially our identity systems or other identity providers. Lots of single sign-on work in today's world. Lots of cloud access security brokers to kind of create a security policy and some data loss prevention strategies around the software as a service providers. A lot more IAM, role-based access control may not be enough anymore. We may be getting involved in attribute-based IAM and hopefully context-aware IAM if and when we need some serious security requirements. And we'll be thinking about the types of authentication. Do we authenticate via password, via a token, via the iris scan? or a retina scan or a fingerprint. And each and every one of these has trade-offs. Some things good, some things not so good. So that's typically where we'll be focusing a lot of time, is on our IAM architecture. Now, network security is also critical, and it's been critical for decades in any security architecture. Whether it's network access control like 802.1x, which is who's allowed on the network and don't allow you on the network if you're not allowed, to segmenting the network in VLANs or private VLANs, which are even a different way to do it, or segmenting a network into multiple VNets or VPCs in the cloud provider. A lot of things goes on with packet filtering here, whether it's an access control list, a security group equivalent on a cloud, whether it's a next generation firewall or something. So lots of packet filtering options, some intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems we're typically doing in this, where the systems are looking as an attack coming in, and if so, can they block it on the network? We're also getting involved in what you call traffic shaping and traffic policing. So we can prioritize mission critical traffic. So if something hit our traffic that was not critical, that traffic could be deprioritized or dropped. So there's a lot of that. Plus network encryption, do we use IPsec? Do we use TLS? They all have their strengths and weaknesses. So it's making those architectural decisions from a network security perspective. Now we also have to protect our data. So data security is going to be key to any security architecture. So first, we need to know what it is we're protecting. So we typically need to classify the data or create a data classification scheme to know what's critical, what's top secret, what's not, what have you, what's publicly available. We have to get involved deeply into data privacy. Data privacy things could be related to minimizing the data, so that, for example, if you're breached or someone sees it, the hacker can't get access to a lot. So here's where we think of things like tokenization, obfuscation, anonymization, pseudo-anonymization that we could add to our security architecture. Now, when we start thinking data, we need to make sure the data hasn't changed. For example, if you had $1 million in your bank account, you wouldn't want somebody to change it to $10. So that typically gets into data integrity. Typically, we use some hashing mechanisms here and other things to make sure that the data is what it's supposed to be. But, that's going to be a big component in any data security architecture. We will have to architect in data loss prevention strategies, maybe like data loss prevention tools. For example, some work on the egress of the network to prevent things from leaving your systems. But typically speaking, we will need some type of data loss prevention strategy in any type of data security architecture we have. We'll have to talk about encrypting the data when it's stored, when it's in motion, and potentially even when it's in the CPU with secure computing. And of course, from a data security perspective, if we have data that's no longer useful to us, that data could still be useful to a hacker. So making sure we don't keep data longer than we actually need it. So that's what's going to be the elements of a data security policy. And obviously there's more that could go into it, but this is at least at a high level of, what's going into a security architecture. Now, as security architects in any security architecture, we have to use a lot of cryptography, especially if we're working on the assume breach, like in zero trust. We have to encrypt everything for the most part. So you'll have to know about the types of cryptography and think about what kinds of cryptography we always use. And in every architecture, we pick a type of cryptography based upon how serious the asset is we're protecting, what is the risk of that kind of asset. So being able to determine the right kind of cryptography is part of it. We obviously look into digital signatures and other ways for people to prove that they are who they claim to be. Anytime we get into a discussion of cryptography, your architecture will have to have something related to key management for your encryption keys. And typically speaking, we get involved in some flavor of hashing to make sure that the data hasn't been changed, the message hasn't been changed, what have you. Now, I feel like I've always spent so much of my time as a security architect working with governance, risk management, and compliance. So at a little high-level elements of the security architecture here, the governance structure that we're going to choose to use, the policies and procedures that we create that are going to guide how the employees do their jobs, any kind of regulations we need to adhere to. For example, if we are in the U.S. providing healthcare, we need to adhere to HIPAA. Maybe we're dealing with European citizens and we need to deal with GDPR. So we always have to map to whatever the regulations are that we need to. And of course, anytime we come up with a new policy or a new procedure or a way for people to do things, we have to train the employees and make sure they're aware of it, because if they're not aware of it and they don't know what to do, we're going to have a problem. So the last kind of main element that's going to go into your security architecture is physical security. Let's face it, if a hacker can just plug their system in the network, they can do anything they want. So there's a lot of physical security that's going to go into protecting your environment. Fences, guards, dogs, turnstiles, there's all means of physical security that we typically consider as part of what we're doing. Fire suppression, what kind of fire suppression? Can we use water? Can we not use water? Can we use halon? Can we no longer use reclaimed halon? Do we have some other thing that we want to use like CO2? And if we use it, what are the risks? So a lot of that will go into our security architectures, is that emergency preparedness, that kind of fire suppression, that kind of anything into protecting. Because at the end of the day, here's what I like to view security architecture as, and here's how I see it. Security architecture to me is about protecting the organization, its assets, and its people. And realistically thinking, if you look at any of these elements I really touched on today, whether it was risk management, whether there was identity and access management, whether it was network security, physical security, cryptography, it was all about protecting the organization, its assets, and its people. Now, if you'd like to become a security architect or an enterprise architect or a cloud architect or an artificial intelligence architect, join me in a free architect webinar. We run 2 each week, and on our free architecture webinars, we'll go over various architect careers like the security architect. We'll talk about the exact skills you need to be successful in any of these architect careers. We'll talk about how you get your first job as, a security architect or an enterprise architect, and everything you need to do. And on these free webinars, they'll be hosted on Zoom. You can ask me any question, and I'll do anything I can to help you for free on these webinars. So please join. And the link to register for any of our free security architect, enterprise architect, cloud architect webinars is in the description of this video. Now, if you enjoyed this video on what goes into a security architecture and the elements of a security architecture, please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell to be notified of new videos to assist you in your security architect, enterprise architect, or other architect career. This is Mike Gibbs signing off for now, and I hope to see you in a free webinar or another video soon. Take care.